Hey everyone, welcome back. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by Erica Farmer, who is the co-founder and director of Quantum Rise. Erica, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here, excited for the conversation that we're going to have, especially off the back of learning technologies quite recently as well. And no doubt some of our reflections will come into this, I can imagine.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that as well, right? Why not? So we're in this space of AI where we talk about AI in human capital, AI in learning, artificial intelligence in all of its weird and wonderful guises, from machine learning and neural networks and recommender engines all the way through to the GPTs and Claudes and Groks of this world. Will do something a bit more interesting, and everything in between. But as you've just referenced learning tech, we were just at learning tech and had a little bit of coffee and had the chance to talk about what the impact of AI is going to be on our industry and what we're seeing in the market based on what is the biggest event for suppliers in the calendar year. And to some degree, what we had said we were going to talk about AI and the humans and critical thinking and problem solving, all of the things that people are saying that people should do and all the things that people are saying AI should do. But let's start with the point of learning tech, because we've kind of just been there. It's fresh in our minds. And I did some live posting, live vlogging while I was there. I had a chat with lots of different portions of the market to figure out what was going on. But what was your take? What did you think of the show, the industry, what you were seeing from suppliers, all of these things?
Yeah, it's always a game of two halves for me, these kind of events, because it's mecca, I guess, in a way for L&D to meet people. Like you said, we met for the first time, grabbed a coffee, which was amazing to have that face-to-face, catched up with some clients, caught up with some great network and some people. I wasn't particularly drawn, although I wandered around several times on the exhibition floor, to anything that there was nothing that felt really different that I kind of, my ears pricked up and went, oh, I need to go and learn about, I'm going to get something from that, or that feels different, or that looks different. It was kind of the video avatars, the create the e-learning, or the plat search kind of Netflix hyper personalization. You know, does it do what it says on the tin, search facility type stuff? There wasn't anything which I felt, do you know what, you guys are going to draw the market here because this feels really different, which was a shame because it was some really good conversations with people. But actually, when you stress test it from a learning and development buying perspective, didn't feel different in any way. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, so my reflections are very similar. I thought that suppliers are very good at delivering what clients want, because that's market forces, it's what happens. And I suspect very much clients aren't really asking for the kinds of things that the likes of you and I might be going and hoping that are being delivered. And had a couple of, it's a show. I had a couple of ranty conversations, right, with a few people, because it's good when you got everybody together and you can have a few more opinionated discussions. And I had this discussion with a couple of suppliers who are a bit more into data. And I was kind of challenging the whole XAPI business, right? Because my reflections on XAPI are that we had the promise of a different data standard that was going to do some things. Yeah. And it's been poorly adopted. And now we're at a point where actually with conversational models, we probably don't need that data specification. Life probably has moved on. But if life has moved on, what is there any mileage in talking about something like XAPI when the industry hasn't really moved on from SCORM? And if all of that's true, then this concept of personalization is based on what? It's based on nothing. What did you click on?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you don't really have that deep personal data, like social media. You remember the whole Cambridge Analytica thing with Facebook? And they're like, we know everything about everybody and we can really target things. We're not in that position because we haven't collected everything on everybody.
Yeah.
So if we haven't, then how do we get to this point of talking about personalization as if it's a thing in our industry? I don't really get it,
Yeah. Yeah. And also people's needs change constantly. So if you're gathering data around, I don't know, capabilities or skills matrices or job families or whatever, typical talent L&D data, that by default is going to change because of what AI is going to drive anyway. So it is chicken and egg, which is why you kind of almost crave for the innovative approach, the kind of that looks new and interesting, because is that what's going to drive it? Because you're right, I've got clients that are kind of behind the curve on adopting even Microsoft Copilot because they're nervous of their data set in the background or what sits on SharePoint or whatever it might be. And that becomes the barrier then to introducing large language models, because the the poorness of the data, when actually, isn't it like, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? Isn't that the drive, or should be the drive? And we talk about that in L&D all the time, right? It should be a business case and what are we doing to enhance the business or productivity or motivation or whatever it might be. Why would introduction of large language models be any different? I don't know, maybe that's a naive response from me, but that's kind of where I sit in the whole human kind of distinctive skills piece, I think.
I mean, let's dig into that a little bit, because it's not only the human piece, but it's also the L&D piece, and how should we be doing things. And I think this idea of having a business purpose is, like we've talked about it, but I think it's being glossed over a little bit when we talk about things like Copilot implementation, because in my business, I have Copilot. I also have ChatGPT, I have Claude, I have everything, because I'm running an AI business. Why wouldn't I have everything? But they all have different uses. There's a different thing that each of these different applications are better at or worse at than their counterparts. And I think it's a little bit of a short-sighted view to just implement Copilot and say that's going to do everything.
Yeah.
But that seems to be where organizations are going. So when we have the conversation about, what should people be doing and what should AI be doing, we need to have one eye on this. What is an unfortunate fact for me that I'm seeing a lot of people a lot of people in organizations are saying that their IT departments have implemented Copilot and then restrict everything else. So we probably need to have an eye on that, right?
Yeah, again, because it's tech first rather than skills first. And you're hearing a lot of skills first, organisational type phraseology and jargon and careers and talent management, L&D, etc. But how can it be skills first if we're just, arguably the tech that we will partner with and collaborate going forwards more than anything else in history? We don't even understand what that means in terms of a strategy and why we're pushing that forward. And to your point, you default to Microsoft Copilot just because that's part of the, I guess, the Microsoft environment that you've already bought. So by default, somebody's made a decision on the price of a license versus the impact that it could be giving the organization. And with a new client tomorrow, and it was actually refreshing to hear them say, yes, we do have Copilot, but we've also invested in ChatGPT because we know it gives us this, and we're also looking at this tool because we know it's going to give us something different. And my first response was, that's probably shouldn't be that surprising, but I was like, that's so refreshing to hear, because it's, which is crazy really, but it's like, why are we looking for the scraps? This should be innovative and different and the next revolution and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's in the word revolution a little bit that you've got potentially, this is going to sound terrible what I'm going to say anyway, potentially you've got L&D teams who don't know how to make sense of the AI market, and they're struggling to keep up with all the innovations, talking to IT teams who are also struggling with that same point, making sense of the market and what are the innovations that are out there. And they're talking with business leaders who are struggling to find use cases for AI, but somehow they still kind of want to do it. And that then takes us down this road of, is there anything we already have we can just upgrade, click a button, pay a couple of dollars more every month, and then we've done it.
Yeah. Which ironically, we've got the opportunity, and I know we said this in COVID around hybrid working and virtual learning and this kind of stuff, but one of the things I was listening to, one of the seminars I was listening to, it might have been Josh Burson talking about it actually last week, was you can't afford to sit there and pretend that somebody else is going to draw up your chair at the table. Like, if you're not influencing your company's AI strategy right now in terms of not just what tools are being used, but how and the impact, and particularly the OD, so not just content and skills, but OD and redesign of what success looks like organisationally, that you're already a step behind. We can't just play that poor kind of cousin type role again, or like just wait for it to feed through your chief tech officer to your chief people officer, and then the chief people officer goes, kick it over the fence, L&D over to you type thing. The ones that I'm seeing really successfully are the ones that have been kind of testing and learning what this means in scaling coaching, for example. They were testing and learning 2 years ago, and they're now kind of on their second wave of scaling and their continuous improvement, and they're seeing an uplift in business development and conversion because they're able to track the performance of the business development team more successfully on virtual meetings and things like that. None of it's rocket science or big, expensive AI tools, but the thinking and the strategy has been done with the involvement of the HR and the L&D function to understand what that looks like from a people perspective. And that seems, well, there's a bit of a missing link there at the moment for me, and that's quite rare, those kind of situations.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a couple of more forward-thinking, mature clients in this space as well, and they're doing this kind of thing. And I'll pick up on the skills point as well while I say this, but the approach that they're taking, and I'm helping them with, is, well, what's our task structure? What's our activity structure? Which bits can we do with AI? How much time or money were we spending on doing these things in the first place? How does that lead us to a benefits case or an ROI perspective? And then how can we therefore justify, we were doing these things, we're now doing them with AI. The delta is this, and the cost effectiveness is this. The difference in output is something. And that builds a bank of use cases. Then you optimize against those use cases, which then has a tangible impact on the business. So they're taking that kind of formal innovation structure or that kind of approach, which is the way to do it. But the skills point is, for me, then questionable, because when we look at the entirety of the skills market, what we have is a bunch of intangibles, things that we can't really measure, and we try and measure them declaratively. So we say to somebody, well, how good are you at communication? I'm an 8 out of 10. Based on what? Nothing. But let's just take your word for it. Versus in the AI space, we're really looking at activities, and activities subdivided into tasks, which AI can do. So we have task fit analysis versus things like skills analysis. And if you're familiar with the term data ecology, these two things are different levels: tasks, activities, and skills. They mean different things. You can't attribute one to the other directly. And I haven't really seen a data taxonomy that moves one from the other. So effectively, we're now talking two different languages. And if we're talking two different languages, then we're talking about measuring things that have no relation to each other. So I'm not convinced of the whole idea of skills or skills-based organizations on that basis. But what do you think?
I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. And it kind of flies in the face with what a lot of the big organizations are saying. But if you look at some of those big organizations, LinkedIn being an example, if you look at some of those organizations, they are using AI to, support the job market, to look at being a personal, writing coach for your CV or whatever it might be, or, looking at the Netflix stuff with the volume of content and hyper-personalization of learning journeys. But I guess you could argue LinkedIn are looking to sell subscriptions to LinkedIn, right? And LinkedIn courses. So they would want to go down the skills first route, which I buy into. I get that. I think it's the right thing for now. Whether it's the right thing for the future, questionable, because of where AI will potentially take us. I just don't know if anybody's actually having that debate or that conversation at that level, though, to say, what does skills first give us versus looking more at the data, for example, or understanding what does that mean on a practical level in terms of task. How long's a piece of string, right?
Well, the other thing I think that is, again, I don't agree with this, but I think that one of the talking points that I found at the show last week was that more than one vendor said to me, we have a skills taxonomy and we have an AI upskilling thing, whether it's a platform or journey, whatever it was that they were selling. And upon a little bit of scrutiny, it turns out what they were talking about was a course catalog. And a course, watching a video for 5 minutes doesn't make me skilled in a thing.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect between content consumption, passive content consumption, and skills. And I think any platform, I'm not looking specifically at LinkedIn, but any platform that has this disconnect, but it's selling that thing. So it's saying, we have a bank of content, whatever it is, videos, podcasts, materials, books, something. We have a bank of materials, and you are able to consume those in a way that has a taxonomy. We'll point you to those. That's fine. Recommender engines are a thing. And then if you consume those, we will say that you are skilled, and you can then declare yourself against those skills. There's such a logical disconnect between all of these things that it just doesn't work for me. And that's kind of my problem with this whole skills piece, that I haven't paid enough attention, or it's just not apparent that these things are linked to each other in a way that satisfies data reliability and validity.
Yeah. And can someone actually prove that they're competent in doing the task or job role that they're being hired for or being assessed against? Yeah, for sure. Get that. Yeah. Yeah. And I
Definitely
guess
not.
that's where this stuff poses a lot of those. It doesn't pose the questions, but it shines a light on a lot of this stuff. And that's what I say to a lot of people when people say, but what about this? Because AI does this. Like,
Mm.
I don't know, issues with data protection, putting data into large language models, for example. I said, AI hasn't done anything like that. We've always had the problem with sensitive data. AI has just shone a light on it, and we've all started talking about that. So is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Or is that just making us more aware that we shouldn't be putting personal data into social media or into Google, or leaving an encrypted cybersecurity e-learning back on the day when somebody leaves an encrypted laptop on the train or whatever it might be? It's always been there. This stuff's always been there. So question mark goes back to, where's the innovation coming from? And I think the innovation comes from, certainly from a learning and development perspective right now, like we could just keep training people on mundane skills, illustration, or, the boring stuff that all of us have in our jobs and have to do.
Mm.
Or we could be a little bit different and understand what makes people more motivated and satisfied in their life and their job and their motivation, what stretches people's grey matter a little bit more and then allows them to properly collaborate or work with that kind of technology. And you mentioned critical thinking earlier. There's a whole bunch of things, learning agility, for example, that actually, when I start talking to clients and L&D folk about this, it's like it's very new, even that, the wraparound human distinctive skills piece. So should we be worrying so much about the tool, because tools change, or should we be worrying more around what do people need to actually get the most out of these technologies and be ready to be agile and to change and to grow and to build new tasks and to handle new data or whatever that might be? That's a massive black hole at the moment, I think.
I think there are a number of massive black holes around that kind of thing. So the one that's most apparent to me, I mean, there are a couple, right? But let's take this concept of agility, learning agility.
Yeah.
And I have two problems with that. So the first thing is distribution of attributes in a population is usually normally distributed, right? So you got a bell-shaped curve, and if I can be bothered and figure it out, then maybe I'll draw a little graphic at this point.
You
in the
said
podcast.
bell-shaped there.
So
I thought you said the bullshit curve. Maybe it should be the bullshit curve.
Maybe it should be. Phrase coined. There you go. Right.
Freudian slip, they call it, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of where you have a mean, and then you have standard deviations, and then eventually you get outliers. That kind of bell-shaped curve, there we go, is attributes of people tend to be distributed like that. And what that means is there are certain realities of life. Now, in the learning and development space, we like to shy away from realities of life. But this kind of concept of, if we do this particular thing and whatever it is, an intervention, and we scale it across an organization, then everybody's going to be amazing at this thing.
Mm.
And it's just not true, because you're going to have a distribution, and maybe the mean will change ever so slightly, 5 or 10%, and maybe we can measure it. But your top performers are still going to be your top performers, and your poor performers will probably still be your poor performers. Maybe they'll change slightly in where they are on the curve, but mostly it's going to be normal distribution. And that's a reality that we never come to terms with, because we always say, we'll do this thing, we'll run a communications program, everybody will be amazing at communications. No, they won't. Let's not delude ourselves. They'll be terrible. And that leads me to two problems with what you were just articulating. So the first thing is that people are still going to be terrible at these things. Now, if people are still terrible at these things, we have to come to terms with that and think about, we're going to have displacement of populations who are not that good at things.
Yeah.
We're going to have fewer people who are high performers, and those people are working synergistically with AI. They might change their place if they do or don't use AI in what they do. But broadly, you're going to have fewer people in the workforce who are needed for something. And the second thing is, what are they going to be needed for? Some of the things where I mentioned critical thinking, I've seen this as a talking point. Learning tech was no different. A lot of the basically same old speakers that you see every year were talking about the same old things. People should be doing critical thinking and decision making and problem solving and have oversight over the machines that are going to rule us all, things like this. And it's like, well, these are all things that people are very bad at, right? The last 2 years of prompt engineering courses, 7 prompts to, change your life or whatever. This whole thing is just ludicrous, because, to me anyway. And the reason it is that people are bad at asking questions. Most people to take L&D as an example, most people who were managing suppliers who were saying, maybe I want to make an e-learning course, or maybe SMEs who were going to work with learning departments and say, I want a course on this. Usually they can't articulate what they want. They cannot articulate what they want in terms of look and feel or materials, or what the key messages are, or what the information should be. because people can't ask questions. Go back to the days of Google. How do you structure a Google query? What are you actually asking for? Again, we're not very good at that. So we have all of these sort of problems in this space. And we're going to stand on our soapboxes and say, you know what? People are good at critical thinking and decision making. That's what they should do. It doesn't work for me because most people are not good at these things. So these are the two problems in this space. We're going to have displacement and problems caused by that. And then we have an over-reliance on rhetoric, which kind of talks about people being good at things they're not very good at.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on all of that?
The displacement thing, absolutely. And I'm not one who buys into the AI is going to take your job, because I think there's nothing healthy in that negative narrative for people. But there will be generations or groups or populations that will exit the workforce, for example, because of the changes or AI. And that's happened throughout human evolution, really. My mum left her job as an administrator in a council because the move from Microsoft 8 to Microsoft 9 was too much. So if we think about the jump of where we are now, going into just for some people just to get their head around how AI operates, there's just confusion in the basics of that, and that will be too much for people. 100%. Whether that's ethically, values, capability, I'm due to retire in 5 years, this is too much for me now, I'm going now, whatever that might be. So I subscribe to that. I agree with you that we tend to assume that everybody's at a certain base rate when it comes to skills and everybody will be able to make the leap. And I think that will then probably link into the previous point around displacement of role. Again, can I be bothered to make this change? Yes or no? Fork in the road. I do think there's something around if we're going to have AI as a whatever you want to call it, the term I've been using at the moment is digital colleague. Are you going to be able to collaborate with this technology in the right way that frees up that dividend of headspace or energy or motivation or efficiency or productivity or whatever? The skill set's going to have to change. And for me, critical thinking is probably more around how do I pause and stop and ask why? Rather than just be on this automation train all the time of AI just automating everything and getting swept up with that without being able to pause and say, what are we actually doing here? Back to the point earlier, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Why have we automated that piece? What does that mean to our vulnerable customers? What does that mean to our graduates and apprentices who might be digital natives versus, older clients or people, so I think there's so much in it, but being able to put down old skills with learning agility and pick up new skills in record time and not have power of knowledge dictate our power and resources, which is typically how the workplace is operated, especially in education and learning and places like that. The example I always give, for example, is professors or lecturers in universities. That's how they've held their power through research and knowledge. What does that now mean when you've got a repository of all of the knowledge ever in the world at the tip of your fingers if you're someone who's starting learning or education? So I think there's positions for both. I think it's back to anything. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? If critical thinking is something we need to be thinking about in terms of speed, accuracy, quality assurance, working with blended teams, digital colleagues, understanding your own judgment with this stuff by asking why and having that higher level debate and critical conversation. So I think there's a place for it. You're right, though. Is it for everybody? Should we be upskilling everybody? Probably not.
So then let's examine. Micro. But let's examine how we do this, because I have had this conversation last week. I was on the phone with somebody you might know, and we were talking about this concept of the same thing, right, that we're talking about now. And he was saying that they were implementing something like this. He was talking about a particular place he'd worked, that they had been implementing this kind of thing, like this learning agility is the new thing that everybody wants to go toward. I flippantly, like I always do, I was giving an opinion on this, and I was saying, well, it's strange to me to say that what we want people to be able to learn on their own, to find their own information. We want people to be able to solve problems by going and finding out what the solutions are, implementing the solutions, being able to identify where failure is happening and then rectify that and effectively debug live. And we want people to be able to do that in such a way that adds value incrementally and in an agile way thereby making us all mentally agile because we're then in that routine of solving things based on initiative. Basically, we used to call this initiative.
Yeah.
Which is again not something that a lot of people are good at. It's again going to be normally distributed. So that's all fine. But then the disconnect that I have, because there's always a disconnect in our thinking in this industry, and it's meant to be a cognitive industry, but there's just some things just don't make sense, right? And what we say is we want people to be agile. So the way we're going to achieve that is we're going to sit them in a classroom with somebody who also isn't agile, probably because they've been around for 20 years and we can't displace them. So we're going to say, person who's been around for 20 years and got no history of being agile in their thinking, make some PowerPoints, sit in front of a classroom, we'll do it on Teams, and we'll spoon feed people how to be agile in their thinking. We'll tell them, if you want to be agile, go and find out information. Here's the resources, so you don't have to go and look for them. Here's where you can find that information. And now everybody's ticked the box. We've got some certificates. Everybody liked the sandwiches, and off you go. Now everybody's agile in a learning way. Disconnect. It doesn't make any sense. Why would we do it this way? So what's the solution?
What's the solution? Gosh, if I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be sat here talking on this podcast right now, my friend.
Come on, I'm sure you would.
Maybe I would. Yeah, maybe I still would. I think we are in the habit of classing everything as a skill and a skill set. To your point, that's just knowledge, just being talked out, ticking a box, compliance, whatever it is. Where for me, this is around testing people's thinking, to your point earlier around being cognitive, and understanding the mindset of truly being able to do something rather than just turn up to a virtual classroom or a video and just say, yes, I've had training on, blah, blah, blah. And I guess this is where it goes, and I know this is a conversation probably for another day, this is where you get the debate around why are we called training and development or learning and development, when actually that isn't really the goal that we should be going after. It should be, I don't know, performance or pick a word, whatever it might be. So it's this stuff for me isn't about skills or training and learning. It's about continuous improvement. It's about being able to ask the question. It's about asking why and being comfortable to ask your manager why, not just be told and be done, as it were. And actually the whole kind of pushing the boundaries of being a risk taker and being a bit more entrepreneurial. And, you know, you're starting to hear a little bit more about entrepreneurial skills, but you've got to give people the space to be entrepreneurial and be able to fail and then have the mindset that what did I learn from that and actually do something different. I don't know if I've ever seen an organisation that has the comfort levels to be able to say, off you go, employee, there you go. You got the mindset, go and break something, and by the way, we'll be okay with it. That's what I don't see is perhaps the environment that sits around that. And I'm not giving L&D an out by saying that, by the way. You know, the MD says we're not allowed to do that, so we'll just run training instead, although it's probably the easy answer. I think it's with AI and embracing AI, embracing change, what has to come with it is an organisation that sits around that, so we become guardians of this rather than the police of learning or whatever it might be. So we understand more around using quality assurance and asking questions of critical thinking and being rewarded for the right behaviours rather than having our wrists slapped to say you went and put this into the wrong spreadsheet, so therefore you lose your bonus for next year.
Yeah, I think a lot of these things are tricky, right? Because, I mean, there's the future of L&D as well, and what is that? And I kind of reflect on this a little bit like it's an abusive relationship, you know? Because one day you wake up and you go, you know what? You guys must obey. There's this e-learning. It's got to be done by the end of the day. You've got to click the button. Go and do it. Do it now. Don't question. Just do it. Do it, right? And we got that kind of relationship with the employees in L&D departments. And then the next day we'll go, you know, we'll wake up and we have coffee and cakes and we go and cuddle everybody. We say, you know what? We want you to be the best shining star that you can be. Go fly and kiss the rainbow and be amazing. And then the next day is like, what are you doing? You must finish this thing. Don't think, just finish this thing. Do it now. Do it now.
Yeah.
They need to be, I mean, I'm not saying either of these things is better or worse than the other. They're both probably necessary in organizations. But I think we need to have two different departments. I don't think you can have that kind of relationship with the workforce and build trust. And if we're not there and we're not building trust, then all of these other things that you mentioned around, well, how do we have the space and the freedom to be able to innovate? Well, it's not going to come from a department that doesn't know fundamentally what its relationship is with the workforce. So to me, that's kind of problematic. But the other thing that is problematic, I was paying attention to your language when you were talking, because you were saying, if we're not given the space to be entrepreneurial, and it's true. The language you use is absolutely correct, but it is passive language because I'm an entrepreneur, you are as well. We don't wait to be given things, we can't take it. And if you can't have the mindset that you will go and take that freedom, you will go and experiment because you need to, because you're hungry to do so, because you won't thrive without doing that. That's a different mindset to, sir, can I have the freedom to go and think differently? You know what I mean? So these are tricky concepts.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a great point to pick up. And it's probably, and I'm not going into therapy here at all, but it's probably that was my reflection of being in a corporate L&D team and trying to do something different and being told, Erica, you're the troublemaker, just go and do the job that we paid you to do. Versus where I find myself now, having worked for myself for 6.5 years, because I just couldn't stomach that corporate king of the wings any further. So I think I probably put myself back in that mindset because that's what most L&D people will potentially be in, that space, right? Where they do have their wings clipped and they might want to go and do something different. And that's why you get your freelance market and your self-employed market like us. But then it's how where's the influence back into corporate?
That is true. I had the same experience in big corporations as well. You're not here to do any thinking, you're just here to do the doing, all of these kinds of tropes that you see all the time. So we've both been there, and to some degree, that's why we can now stand on the outskirts and point at things that are bad behaviors or, things that do stifle innovation, because we know that they do, because we've experienced it. We were there.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky line to somehow, and have you seen Rocky? You seen any of the Rocky films?
Yeah, the first one, yeah.
So in Rocky 6, I'm going to get this wrong, but in Rocky 6, right, Rocky Balboa, the one where he's like an older guy, and he says something along the lines of, it's a motivational quote, so if you're watching this and you like motivational quotes, just look it up anywhere you want, Instagram or YouTube or something, you'll find it. And there's a motivational quote which is like something along the lines of, it's not about how hard you get hit, it's about how much you can keep taking it and stand up and go and do your thing, right? I know I butchered it, answers in the comments what the actual quote was.
I think my boyfriend has it as his Facebook profile, actually, so I'll have to go and check it.
Yeah, so there's something like that, right? Basically, keep going. You'll stand up and you'll keep going. You fall over, but you stand up and you do it again. And there's something in me that is both sympathetic to folks who are in big corporations and they have a bunch of people telling them, like IT department says, you can't do this. Your leadership says you can't do this. You're working with a stakeholder and they say, I want it to look like this. Just make it. Just don't mess about, right? And then there's also the innate kind of creativity and the need to help people. And the thing around education of people is one of the noblest things you can go and do with your life, right? So you've got all of these things which are effectively, they're not really in the pocket. They're kind of, battling each other as inner demons do. So you've got all of these things, and I fully sympathize with those. But at the same time, if you want to make it happen, just go and make it happen. And I go back and forth between these two.
Yeah, I get it. And like you said, when you've been there and done it and you felt the pull and the pain and the politics and all the rubbish that goes with it, it's I don't know about you, but sometimes when I speak to clients and I start to get more drawn in back into that, it kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit because it puts me back into feeling like, oh my God, I remember like the anxiety and the phone call and dreading that name coming up and the email landing and like now I can feel it just talking about it. So when you've got that psychological hack going on in your head, that kind of, takeover, how are you ever really going to think like an entrepreneur or an innovator or have the courage to push something forwards if you're fighting that fight or flight going on with all the bullshit as well? Yeah. So I do empathise, I do get people. And sometimes, is it easier to pay someone like you or me to come in as a consultant and just tell people what to do? Of course it is. So why there's a market there for people just to say, look, if you want to do this, I recommend this. You want to do this, recommend this. Let's do all the questions. Let's do all the fact find. Let's speak to the right people. Of course, that's part of it. But ultimately, there's only so many ways to do it. And I think my biggest critique of buyers or directors or heads of L&D sometimes is they sometimes feel they have to be everything to everybody. And particularly when it comes to things like AI. And actually, we all know that that's maybe not everybody's strength or not the reason why they got into doing what they want to do. And that's okay as well. So I think the question, some people could, ask themselves watching this podcast is actually, what do I love about doing my job? And if it isn't stuff that I'm being asked to do organisationally, then I've got a few choices to make. Is that my role? Is that my business? Do I bring in a consultant? Do I do something different? That's the critical thinking piece, the why and the bigger piece, to actually get to the root cause of what's going on and what the best solution is. And I don't think we always do that. I think we play the game a bit too much sometimes.
Yeah, that's probably true, and I agree with your point that it's easier to bring people like you and me in. If you're watching this, there it is. It's easy to do that. But this other point about we got to do it, right? We've got to plug it. But the other point around, what are we doing in our departments? So what should we be focusing on? And one of the things that came up in the conference last week, I can't remember who said it. It might have been the Burson speech. It might have been a different speech. But this idea, and I've heard this a lot, and it's something I disagree with. This idea that to be effective L&D people in the future, you need to upskill in AI and tech to the level where you can be building things yourselves. Now, there's a level, fine, there's always a level. Making content isn't it, by the way. In case you're watching and you're thinking, you know what, I can make images in Midjourney. I'm good. No, I don't agree with that. But this idea that we're going to have L&D departments that are going to upskill to the point where they're going to be talking about AI, they're going to be implementing large language models, they're going to be building agents in marketplaces, and they're going to somehow have a seat at the table next to the IT team who also do all of that stuff. It's not going to work, because you're just going to show up and you're going to go, you know what, we can do all these things. And the IT teams will go, so we can do these. We already have a department that does this. We've got all of these teams, all of this infrastructure. Why don't you guys go away? So there's that obvious consequence to that. And on the flip side, you've got the L&D teams who should be looking after people and cognitive needs and human hierarchies and all of these other things. And then there's the glue that holds all of this together, which is the data piece. What are the messages that we need to curate? What are the things that we need to maximize as good behaviors, and all of the things around skills, which I've already given my opinion on. But all of these things are data. So we have basically three areas. We have the human side, we have the tech side, and we have the data side.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see where L&D departments decide to go in those three bits. There's a fourth bit, which I generally don't talk about. It's only talked about in the darkest corners of the internet. And that is I suspect in the near future, because I also I don't just do AI in L&D, I also do AI in marketing and customer service and a lot of other, comms and other things. Now, what I'm seeing is all of these departments are basically, we make media to elicit a behavior, and we release our media on a particular technology infrastructure, whether it's social media, whether it's something else, to try and elicit that behavior. And then we gather data on the interactions of people with media. Learning's that's basically what corporate learning is. That's basically what marketing is. And it's basically what external communications are. So all of these things seem to me that they all are going to be using AI for content generation or person-to-person conversation. They're all going to have some kind of architecture that allows them to do that. There's a future for me where all of these departments are basically one department, the media department or something. And then they just go off and do that. And then whether it's eliciting an internal person to have a particular behavior, or a customer to have purchasing behavior, or something else, it's much of a muchness. The AI stuff that workflow is going to be the same. Yeah. So I can see a future where these are all just one department as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because like you said, if we're leaning so much into it, but the future of that specialism, if it still exists for whatever reason, is maybe something different. So what comes to mind when you talk about that is, don't disagree, especially from a content whatever perspective, is did L&D then become the guardians of, I don't know, communities and people and connection and, I don't know, whatever you want to call that piece? I know Andy Lancaster does a lot on learning communities, and could you use the AI to facilitate that, to do the hard work, the legwork, the notes, the arrangements, whatever you want to call it, but actually the skill of the learning person or the performance person or whoever, the coach, whatever it's going to be, is to provide more of that human stuff that we need to, that might become like a drug to us in the future if we're using that much technology. It's something we're craving even more. We crave that post-pandemic. Yeah. So yeah, it's really an unwritten book at the moment with all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, how do you access other people, right? This meaningful interaction that is innately human. And that's something that as digital becomes more scalable, I think that's something that becomes more of a luxury commodity. Yeah. It's going to be if companies do invest in that, it's going to be the thing that only the top leadership can do, these networking events and things like that.
Mm.
And if only top leadership can do it, then it's going to be more sought after and more craved by everybody else, because you go, I need to be a certain level of seniority before somebody will talk to me in person. So that's going to be really rare.
Gosh, can you imagine?
I can imagine. Right. So we're going to have these kinds of interactions where we're online, and then, you know, somebody will say, well, can we meet in person? Can we meet for a coffee? Can we meet in London? And or, you know, the nearest big town. And well, we will probably see companies saying, you know what, you've got a budget for this, or you don't have a budget for this, or we can only approve it for certain levels of folks. And then they'll say, well, you know, am I going to spend my own money on a train ticket and a coffee just to go and have an in-person interaction? Maybe, maybe not. So it's a foreseeable future, right?
Yeah, and we already operate in line with that with coaching, and organisations will only provide coaching at a certain level, right? Or leadership development, or any kind of training at a certain level. So it's actually not that too far of a jump, is it, to see that happening? Yeah. Which again is where you get back into displacement and things like that, and also entrepreneurship that we've talked about. Whereas the likes of, I can imagine yourself and myself will probably go, well, to that I'm going to go and do my own thing anyway. So which is kind of what we've done. We go a bit full circle on that, really, don't we? I guess we could talk about that for hours and hours.
Next time on this podcast, we talk about. Next time we do this, we should really go into the depths of big corporates and
love to
within the boundaries of what we can actually talk about. But
yeah,
I think there are.
Yes, I find it therapeutic talking about this stuff.
It's cathartic, right? But one of the other things that came out of my reflections on the Learning Tech show last week was that I've given a few speeches where I've talked about AI being the leveling factor for the playing field, where you can have big companies, you know, the Midjourneys and Perplexities of this world, where you've got like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, and it's like $1 billion company, versus the traditional way of looking at companies where you needed to scale headcount if you were going to scale revenue. We're not really in that space anymore, and you can do a lot with a small company with a few people equipped to the hilt with all of the AI technologies that we have out there. But again, I wasn't really seeing much in the way of the technology that enables companies to do this was absent from the show last week. But some of the suppliers that were there were still in this category, right? So they have a handful of people, 30, 40, 50 people, maybe 80, 90, you know, those kinds of numbers. And they're using AI to sell products to this particular market. So there's a mixture of things there. But this leveling of the playing field bit means that if you're an entrepreneur and you have access to the latest tech, the drive to use it, then why wouldn't you be able to compete with a huge company?
For sure. Yeah, level is probably the right word. You know, because organisational edge, success, whatever you want to put as that benchmark, is going to change. And I guess that also comes down to, you know, I don't know about you, but I can't stand when I'm asked to respond to a tender, or people say I'd like a written response on your RFP, whatever, because there's always questions in there about like headcount, turnover, policy, all of this rubbish that actually that low quantum rise. You know, don't get me wrong, we turn over a fair sum of money, but certainly not. We're not a Hemsley Fraser or a QA or anyone like that. And I now have the ability to compete on the bid from an AI perspective, but, you know, actually, are you going to rule me out straight away because of our size? So there's a buying challenge on actually what does the right supplier look like, and does it matter how big they are? I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that certainly, I think, saying this but very delicately, I think that public sector procurement needs to get right a little bit, and that is it fair? Is it fair in a way that a big business, a multinational, huge headcount can compete for a bid in the same way that smaller providers can? Because there are barriers that are, as I say, potentially insurmountable to certain sizes of business. And the reason I say public sector specifically is that you expect the government to be fairest to the population and to the economy.
Yeah.
Private sector businesses maybe less so; they've got different interests. But you expect that fairness in government, so that's something that I think they could do more to get right.
Absolutely. But, reflection on the entire population for that one, I think, is it? Yes, let's see some more women, but let's see some more people of colour at these kind of events. We were talking about that, weren't we? And let's see some more representation of people of colour, not just talking about DE&I, which is what you often see. So, how does democratisation of AI support that stuff? It's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that I've been asked to give an opinion about that a couple of times, and I've declined to do so.
Yeah.
Because I tend to ignore is the wrong term, but I tend to keep myself slightly apart from DE&I initiatives.
Yeah.
For this reason, because they tend to be, this is where all the coloured folks hang out, right? And I don't want to be that guy. I want to do my own thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a difficult one. But the topic of AI and DE&I, specifically, I've been asked to give that opinion, and I haven't yet. But we'll see if I eventually do that.
Yeah.
But there we go. Right. So look at one eye on a time. Let's wrap up there. So, Erica, this has been amazing. I'm going to ask you one more question, and that is the future of AI in learning and development industry. Utopia or dystopia? What do you think?
It's a heart versus head quandary, isn't it? Like, how do you define the future? I like the stuff that Philippa Hardman talks about in regards to, you have to rip up your org structure, what you measure yourself on, blah, blah, blah. It's not just putting in more training designers using AI, blah, blah, blah. So I guess the positive, Erica says, I'd love it to be utopia. I think it can be a game changer, but it's mindset as well as skill set. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to take the positive spin, if that's all right.
Interesting. I think you know me well enough to know that I'm going to go the other way.
Where you're going to go, yeah.
I think it will be slightly dystopian because I think all the things we talk about, whether it's tech, whether it's performance consulting, because performance consulting is operational consulting, basically. But all of these areas where we say we should go into these areas, I think that the leap in terms of skills, whether skills exist or not, but the leap in terms of capabilities, let's use that term instead, for somebody who's in L&D who is either a trainer or an instructional designer, and therefore their jobs are most at risk of from the AI revolution. The leap to say those folks are just now going to go into AI, or they're just now going to go into performance consulting, or even coaching or something like that. All of these things that we talk about, I don't think they're possible. I think the leap is so big to shift from one thing to another that it's unlikely to happen. That itself, I think, causes a slightly dystopian view of people with current skill sets wandering around not finding something to do, and people with new skill sets from other parts of industries moving into the space that businesses need them to do. So that's going to be a little dystopian because it's going to be chaotic. So that's my view on that. There you go.
Love it.
Anyway, so let's wrap up there. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. You can find us on all of the social media platforms, so follow us on Instagram, things like that as well. You get little clips of these podcasts. But for now, just thank you, Erica, for being part of this hour with me. It's been amazing to have you. And
thank you. It's been great to be here.
And let's catch up soon and do more of these. But yeah, thank you everybody for watching. See you next time.